Welcome back to the Proverbs series, guys. Last video, we looked at chapter 1, verse 7, which says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." But today, I want to look at verse 22 now in Proverbs chapter 1. By the way, I'm literally recording this only minutes after recording the last video, so I don't know why I'm saying today as if it's a whole different day. So that was kind of stupid. Please just disregard that. Anyways, the verse reads like this: "How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge?" That's from the ESV version. So let's just unpack it right now and just straight up just dive into this, because this is going to be truly just profound, and I can't wait to just get into it. First, we got to set the stage, though, right? So, if Proverbs 1:7 is the thesis, then Proverbs 1:22 is the confrontation. Because by the time we reach verse 22, wisdom herself has entered the scene. If you know, you know. Solomon personifies wisdom as a woman crying out in the streets, in the marketplaces, at the city gates. She's not hiding in a library somewhere waiting to be discovered. She is loud, public, and urgent. And her first words to the crowd are not a lecture. They're a lesson. How long? That is the cry of someone who has been patient for a very long time and is now pleading for a response. It is the same language the psalmists use when crying out to God in distress. It carries emotional weight. It's not a rhetorical warm-up. It's a genuine appeal. And so the verse identifies three categories of people wisdom is addressing, and understanding the distinction between them is the key to unlocking the entire verse, right? So let's get to the three characters now, right? The simple. So the Hebrew word for simple, petty, describes someone who is naive, open-minded in the worst possible sense, easily influenced, and lacking discernment. This is not the same as being ignorant through no fault of your own. The simple person has had exposure to wisdom and has simply never grabbed hold of it. They float through life without conviction, absorbing whatever the current around them carries them toward. The simple one is not hostile to wisdom, they are indifferent to it. They are not fighting against instruction. They are just not particularly interested in it either. And that indifference, Solomon is warning us here, is its own kind of danger, right? And so later in Proverbs, in chapter 14, verse 15, it captures them pretty well. It says, "The simple believes everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps." The simple person is just a pushover for whatever idea is the loudest or most comfortable, and then they mistake agreeableness for virtue and confusion for humility. Wisdom's question to them is pointed: how long we love being simple. Now, notice, wisdom does not say, "How long will you be simple?" She says, "How long will you love it?" The simplicity has become a preference, a comfort zone. They are not just simple, they are attached to their simplicity. And now let's go on to the scoffer, right? The scoffer is a significant step further down the road. And so the Hebrew word is letz, which describes someone who mocks, ridicules, and makes a sport of cynicism. When the simple person is passive, the scoffer is active. He has taken his rejection of wisdom and turned it into a personality almost. So scoffers do not just avoid truth. They make fun of people who pursue it. They use humor, sarcasm, and social pressure to make wisdom seem naive or even uncool. The people in the room who just roll their eyes when someone talks about integrity or laughs when someone takes their faith seriously. All right. Proverbs 9:7-8. This is later in Proverbs, by the way. It gives us a striking message as well. Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, and he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Look, that is such a remarkable statement right there, because the scoffer has gotten to a place where correction does not humble him. It hardens him. He interprets reproof as an attack and responds with contempt. Psalm 1:1 famously warns against sitting in the seat of scoffers, quote unquote. The imagery is of someone who has just settled in, made themselves comfortable in mockery. It's no longer a mood or a moment, it's just straight up a posture. Wisdom asks the scoffer, how long will you delight in your scoffing? The word delight is the key here. He enjoys it. It brings him pleasure. There's a social reward to scoffing, an audience, a sense of superiority, a kind of entertainment in tearing things down. Wisdom is calling out that the delight is real, and so is the destruction it is quietly producing. And then lastly, we have the fool, right? We encountered evil, the morally obstinate fool, back in verse 7. Here the word is kasil, which describes a dull, thick-headed person who is not just resistant to wisdom, but has developed a settled contempt for it. This is the most hardened of the three, believe it or not, right? Because where the simple person loves simplicity and the scoffer loves scoffing, the fool hates knowledge. Not dislikes, not avoids, just straight hates. There's an emotional investment in staying ignorant, right? Because this person has built an identity around not being corrected, not being changed, and not being taught. Knowledge is perceived as a threat. Proverbs 17:16 delivers what might be the most sarcastic line in all of Scripture. Why should a fool have money in his hand to buy wisdom when he has no sense? Savage right there from Solomon. But look, the problem is not access. It is appetite. Because the fool could pursue wisdom, he just has no desire to. And so, look, these three characters are not randomly placed. It's intentional. They represent a progression of hardening, right? And so the simple person has an open heart but no direction, right? They can still be reached. They're the most reachable of the three. The scoffer has added mockery to their indifference. They have now built social and emotional walls around their rejection of wisdom. So reaching them requires breaking through that pride and performance. But the fool has gone a step further and developed an active hatred. I mean, wisdom is not just unappealing to them, it is just the enemy. And this mirrors what we see in Romans 1 in the New Testament, where Paul describes a downward spiral where people suppress the truth, their thinking becomes futile, their hearts darken, and God eventually gives them over to what they have chosen. And so the progression it's never just abrupt, it's always gradual, and it starts with something as quiet as just loving your own simplicity. Okay. By the way, because one of the greatest pieces of advice my dad always gives me all the time is to simplify my life. But I don't think he means it in this way. I think my dad is just saying, don't stress out about things that you cannot control, right? But I think that's what he means when he tells me not to simplify my life. He's not telling me to be stupid. So it's important to make that distinction, right? That's just an example from my own life that I felt was necessary to say here, because I just think it can be sort of misconstrued, if not observed carefully, right? But anyways, why does wisdom cry out in public, right? Big question. Well, one detail worth lingering on is where wisdom is standing when she makes this appeal. Proverbs 1:20-21, right before this verse that we're examining here, says, she is crying out in the street, in the markets, at the head of the noisy streets, at the entrance of the city gates. These are not sacred places, right? These are ordinary, everyday locations. The marketplace, the city gate, which was the ancient equivalent of the courthouse and the town square. Wisdom is not tucked away in a temple. She's in the middle of normal life. This is theologically significant because it tells us that God's wisdom is not inaccessible or reserved for religious insiders. It's available in the ordinary rhythms of daily life. The person who says, I never got the chance to learn wisdom is, according to this passage, not being honest with themselves. Wisdom has been calling. The question is whether anyone has even been listening. And look, I mean, come on. Jesus even echoes this in Luke chapter 14-17 in the Gospels with the parable of the great banquet, where the master sends his servant to call those already invited with the message, come, for everything is now ready. The feast is prepared, the invitation is extended. But the tragedy of the story is not that people could not come, it is that they were too occupied with other things to even bother, right? And so let's talk about the danger of delayed response here, right? Because wisdom's appeal in verse 22 is urgent. Wisdom warns, because I have called and you refused to listen, having stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, I will also laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. That is some jarring language right there. Wisdom herself mocking the one who mocked her. And this is not God being cruel. It's the natural consequence of consistently rejecting correction. And at a certain point, the capacity to receive wisdom just diminishes. Not because God cuts people off arbitrarily, but because the heart has been hardened long enough, loses its softness. Hebrews 3:13 in the New Testament speaks clearly to this. It says, exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. I mean, look, the hardening is real, it's gradual, but it is preventable, but only while there's still a today to respond in. And so this is why the how long question carries so much weight. Let's be real, it's not just a rhetorical frustration, it is a mercy warning. Because every day that passes us in simplicity, scoffing, or foolishness is a day the heart gets incrementally harder. So the invitation is still open, but the window is not infinite. So let's get practical with this verse right here, right? I think the first takeaway for us all is to diagnose which character we are closest to right now. The second takeaway is that indifference is not neutral ground. And the third takeaway is to watch what we find funny, right? Big one for me that I need to work on, right? But let me just give a closing thought, right? Because, Proverbs 122 was one of the most compassionate verses in the Bible, even though it does not feel that way at first. Wisdom is not condemning from a distance. She's crying out up close in the streets, in the places where real people live real lives. She's asking how long, quote unquote, because she genuinely wants the answer to be no longer. The verse is a mirror. It asks us to look at our own relationship with wisdom and be honest about what we see. Simple, scoffing, or foolish tendencies are not life sentences, but they do require acknowledgement before they can be addressed. The question is not whether wisdom is calling, because she is. The question is whether we are listening.